however. So, last class, we ended up perfectly finishing Hegel's description of how spirit experiences itself as an infant and then as really a toddler, where you're experiencing, you have you go through the terrible twos is my favorite way of talking about it. He doesn't say that. But then, at that point, we end up in the text, in the phenomenology, in the stage where consciousness arrives. And that's what we have in the text. And it's considered literature, but it's also very different from typical philosophy. And you'll notice this, because it writes more like what the Germans would have called a Bildungsroman, or a evolution of character of an individual, right? So Roman in the sense of a novel. Bildung is you're erecting, right? Creating. So a Bildungsroman, that's actually a genre that you could look up. I should type that so you can see how to spell it. Perfect.
So, we might say a coming-of-age novel. Is that similar?
Yeah, that would be.
Idea?
Well, that would be within a certain scope of a person's life, though. Coming of age is where you're like late teens.
Right. Sure.
Late adolescence.
Right. The definition.
This is
says,
like.
Right. It says one's.
It is formative years. Yeah.
But it's not exclusively that?
Well, I think of, I mentioned Goethe's The Trials or Sufferings of Young Werther as an example of that. But it's kind of like really like a biography, but it doesn't have to be a biography of a real person, right? So it could be a fictional, like Werther was not a real person, although it's probably based primarily on Goethe and some of his friends. But here, in a sense, what we have is a Bildungsroman of spirit in general. So this is what consciousness experiences when it becomes self-conscious. And everyone that becomes self-conscious, and by the way, today I think we could argue that I don't think Hegel ever argued that not everyone became self-conscious. I don't know if he ever really met. He probably met people that were not capable of being the kind of individual that he was teaching his students to be, but he's clearly thinking about students and himself, really. It's probably him sitting in his chair thinking, how did this work, right? And so today we might not think it's the kind of thing that everybody experiences. You have to have the right kind of operating system, the right kind of language. You might have to have the right kind of software loaded on your operating system for this to happen. But once you reach the stage where self-consciousness occurs, what's going on? And notice that this is written not as like a description of a self-conscious person has this. No, this is like a roman. This is like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And not even from the state, well, I suppose you could say it's a narrator. But it's a really closely embedded narrator that's experiencing it. So So I'm on page 910, if you get the chance. Or, it's in this text, which I believe is the Miller. No, this is Thomas. The Miller is supposed to be better. Probably interesting. But in any case, so this stage is independence and dependence of self-consciousness. Relations of master and servant might also be called master and slave. But those are metaphors. So it's not really saying that this is a master on the one hand interacting with a servant. Although in this, what we'll see are there's two that participate in whichever way it occurs, and the one dominates the other one. Although they often flip. So it's constantly a dialectical process. It's a dialectical process, right? Two interacting. So self-consciousness is in and for itself, right? Remember, the subjective side is the in itself, and the objective side is the for itself. How I think of myself. I have a conceptual schema that I think of as me, right? But it's the in itself, the real me, that I think of that's thinking about myself as that set of conceptions, right? So self-consciousness is in and for itself, in and through being, in and for itself, for another self-consciousness. So it's revealed to us when we're talking to someone else, and that other person also has a self-consciousness. So I know you're thinking about who you are, what your conceptual schema of yourself is, etc., and you're aware that I think of myself that way. So here's two self-consciousnesses which both have an in itself and for itself, for ourselves, as well as for one another. Watch how this happens. So self-consciousness is in and for itself through being in and for itself for another self-consciousness. That is, it is only as something acknowledged or recognized. And that's true even of me. I mean, I don't know of myself unless I'm thinking of myself, and I recognize that as me, right? So when the kid sees himself in the mirror and is able to recognize it's him or her, right, in the mirror, right, that's when self-consciousness arrives. And it is a social thing, because we don't get to this stage unless we've come to learn of ourselves through the language that we learn to speak from our peers, from our family, etc. That's why it takes until about 2 or so, when you have enough of a language, for you to realize you have a name, right? So we're acknowledged or recognized, right,